My brothers and sisters in Christ, today's gospel passage involves a scolding. It's a scolding that Jesus delivers to his disciples, but in fact as one for us as well. It's one of those haunting passages that ends in a question. Do you still not understand? What we see happening at this point in the Gospel of Mark is Jesus has already multiplied the loaves and fishes. And if we think about that miracle, it's a miracle not just because of the appearance of loaves and fishes, but it's a sign of the superabundant generosity of God. What seems like a logistics problem for the disciples, how do we find enough food to feed, all these people? For Jesus, it's not just how do we feed them, but how do I show the superabundant generosity of God? This is the sign value given of the wicker baskets full of fragments left over. Not only does Jesus make appear this great amount of food to feed all these people, but there's all the much more left over. And so, even after witnessing so much of what Jesus has done and said, and especially poignantly this powerful sign, we find this episode in the boat where Jesus, and Mark, goes out of his way, and the way he's framing this passage and exchange is to point the distinction between the superabundance and the perspective of the disciples. And so Mark makes a point to show they forgot to bring bread on the boat. In a sense, it's just a logistics point. They forgot to bring enough food on the boat. They just brought one loaf of bread. But Jesus begins to warn them of the leaven, to warn against the leaven of the Pharisees and the scribes. And the leaven he is referring to, the disciples don't understand. It says they think he's talking about bread, that they forgot to bring bread on the boat. What he's speaking of is the hypocrisy. That is which a religious lip service that's not backed by any true devotion or faith. And where this gets turned on the disciples, when he challenges their hardness of heart, is that they don't understand, and that's why he makes reference back to the feeding. Do you not understand? How many baskets left? Why do you not understand? Because on one end, Jesus is showing something so much bigger than just a little bit of bread. He's showing, again, the superabundant generosity of God providing for the needs of his people. And on the other end, you have the disciples in the boat worried as they ride with Jesus that we didn't bring enough bread. How are we going to get food? Where this rebuke comes in for us, the same as it is to the disciples here, is we make great proclamations of our faith. We're constantly called to place and to say, Jesus, I trust in you, I put my trust in you. And yet we still quabble and we still get worked up over such little things, as if we don't have all that we need in the Lord. The image of bread that Mark is contrasting here is they're obsessing about their shortage of bread when they have with them in the boat the bread of life, as if that they could ever go without in the presence of Jesus. Jesus never lets his disciples go without, nor does he let us go without. At times, we may not always have the needs met in the way that we want. We certainly may not have every want or desire. And yet, when we put our trust in God, when we pay attention to the things he asks of us, we will find that our needs are met. It's not that we have to set aside the things of God to go about and be self-sufficient. Now, I'm not saying just burying our heads in the sand and expecting things to magically appear. No, we're a practical people, and that's part, if we pay attention to the will of God, is to take care of certain things for ourselves and others. But when we dedicate ourselves, when we are following the will of God, when our eyes are fixed on him, we will find that he will take care of those things that seem to be lacking. God does not let the faithful that follow him go without. He says elsewhere in the gospel, the birds of the sky, they fly about the grass of the field, and yet, why do you worry about food and clothing and these things? Do I not provide for the birds in the air, as the grass in the field? Look at all these things. Do I not provide for my people? If I say I love you, will I not take care of you? And so, we profess faith, but so often by our actions and most of all by our anxieties, the things that we worry about, the things that we get distracted by. They show that perhaps our trust is not all that it should be. And so, we're invited, like the disciples sitting in the boat with Jesus, to look at the bread of life in the face and yet still somehow express that doubt and hear that question, do you still not understand? May God bless you all.